Welcome to Education Matters. I'm your host, Harry Jackson on USANow.tv. Tonight we have a special guest, Mr. Kofi Annan, the former head of the Fairfax County NAACP, and also the founder of the Activated People and the author of Bull in a China Shop. Mr. Kofi Annan, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I forgot to mention, Kofi also served 8 years in the Army. I will not hold that against you, sir, being a naval veteran myself. Again, thank you for your service. He also holds a Master of Science in International Relations from Troy University and a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice with a minor in psychology from Tennessee State University. All right, so Kofi, welcome. So tell us a little about yourself. Tell us about your origin story. Where did you grow up? Tell us about your evolution. How did you become an activist? Tell us about
Sure. Yeah, so thanks for having me on the program. It's an honor. So my evolution, really, I was just one of those people who was kind of sitting on the sidelines for the longest while. I was triggered by some of the police involved shootings that started becoming more prevalent, or at least were being broadcasted more around 2015, 2016. It seemed like a kind of a recurring theme. And I wanted to get involved. And so I decided to join the NAACP in 2016. And so from there, actually what happened was I joined the Fairfax County branch, and it really wasn't that active. It was really just kind of a handful of people who were attending the meetings at the time. And it just so happened that there was an election that year, and I thought I could do better than the way things were currently being done. Even though I had just kind of dipped my toe in myself. I'd only been active in the organization for a few months at that time. And so I joined and decided to run for president, maybe a little bit overconfident on my part, but I felt like the way things were, I couldn't really do too much worse anyway. So I went ahead and joined. I had a vision for what the organization could be. I wanted to be more public facing. I wanted to be more active. So we started taking a really aggressive approach to how we started doing things. We started having more programming to draw people in, to let people kind of have a voice in what was being done, as opposed to just kind of like a leadership to leadership approach. And that worked. We started getting, more and more people started attending the meetings, more and more people started joining. And we started getting a little more attention from local politicians. And things just kind of snowballed from there. We started forming more committees, and one thing led to the next. The more people that started getting involved, the louder our voices got, and the more influence we started having, and we started having some more positive changes in our community that way. But it was really when I really went from like 0 to 100, like within a year span. I was not someone who was active. I was kind of like one of those people who just kind of sat on the sidelines, or maybe got on social media and was upset, but not actively working on the issues. So it was a really a rocket ship ride for me. So how I got involved.
Now it's amazing that within 1 year you took over a chapter and became the number one chapter within the country, and that's an impressive story. So let's talk about the man, about your origin. So when you talk about the NAACP, that's an organization dedicated to the promotion of the economic, political, social, and educational advancement of African Americans within America. So
Right.
From your experience, what that just doesn't happen overnight, right? Building that opportunity is just simply being lucky. You were certainly lucky. Luck is only is opportunity meets preparation. So let's just talk about preparation. So from your upbringing, when we were talking about your book, like the Bull in the China Shop, it goes a lot into your history. It goes a lot into your upbringing. It goes a lot into your character. Can you share with us some of your personal experiences that activated you to become active in your community, that prepared you to take on that leadership role within the NAACP, that led it to become the number one chapter in the country?
Yeah, so I really do believe that the organization NAACP as a whole, it tends to be comprised the majority of people who don't necessarily who haven't been at the bottom of the bottom. I'm one of those people who grew up extremely poor in the ghettos. I grew up in D.C. I experienced the crack cocaine epidemic firsthand. I was personally impacted and had to fight through a lot of the challenges that the NAACP had to is chartered with fighting for, and so a lot of the experiences were personal to me, and I don't believe that the majority of the organization comes from that background necessarily. So my drive to keep fighting was really driven by personal experiences, and so I was able to kind of speak to the person in the street who is kind of the downtrodden, the working class or the poor, and because I was that. And so I think that definitely had an impact in my passion and my drive to fight. I think some of the organizational skills came from my military background. So as I explained in the book, and as you mentioned, I spent quite a few years. I spent 8 years in the military. I joined right after high school, and I think that kind of helped me with some organizational strength. And so one of the first things we did was we created this giant spreadsheet of all of the issues and the committees that we wanted to form and how every committee was going to overlap with each other. I was also an intelligence analyst at the time. I was an intelligence analyst in the military as well as for DoD. I worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency at the time. And I think my analytical background and my military background kind of brought an approach of a more of a structured, methodological approach to how we go about doing things. And so I think that also helps. So the combination of my personal experiences growing up, as well as my military background and intelligence background, and the ability to look at and have a long term vision and kind of create a structure to how we get there. I think those things help to help the branch as well. And I can't admit this. I did have a group of really dedicated committee members at my side the entire time. There was a really core group of folks who were really helped to support me and bring me along. Folks who had been there in the organization for a while, who also wanted to see change and see the organization become more passionate. They were definitely there alongside and helped to groom me and kind of put up some guardrails sometimes if need be. So
So I see that you've in your bio that you've moved on from the NAACP and you created your
mhm.
own organization, the Activated People. Can you tell us a little bit about that organization?
Yeah, so I ended up moving on from the organization for a lot of reasons. Uh, there were over time, I realized that, I found myself kind of fighting. Felt like I was fighting upstream. I felt like I spent too much time having to fight the organization or try to change the organization to try to make it into something that it wasn't. And eventually, without getting into too much details, there I had a blow up with my predecessor. That was kind of like the final straw for me. I decided that, look, I'm done with this kind of an old school way of thinking about how we need to get things done. Um, I needed to step off and create my own organization. I still had a passion, I still had a drive for racial justice activist advocacy, and so I needed to go off and rather than trying to fight people who don't want to see progress on racial justice while also fighting the organization that I feel like was supposed to be supporting me. I felt like it was best for me to just kind of go off and chart my own course and do it that way. And so that's why I formed the Activated People. And so within originally it was meant to be a media platform. I think one of the things that I learned with my experience over with the NAACP in the short time doing racial justice work is that a lot of it had to do with the narratives, right? So sometimes the mainstream media crafts narratives to sound a certain way, whether it be left leaning or right leaning media, and so I wanted to create a media company that be able to tell stories from the perspective of the activists themselves who were doing the work or the people who were directly impacted. And I don't think that's always done in the mainstream media. And so I wanted to. That's what TAP was formed. But right around in 2020, right around when the George Floyd protests just started kicking off, we realized that there wasn't a unifying voice in Virginia who was leading the effort to promote racial justice and police reform in Virginia. So we actually took up the mantle to create a coalition, and we call it the Virginia Coalition for Transforming Police. And we were able to be that black, to create that black led coalition to fight for police reform here in Virginia. And within a few weeks of forming the organization, we were able to pressure the General Assembly to put police reform on the agenda for a special session, because it originally wasn't. And then over time, we were able to get about 12 different laws passed that had to do with policing. And so we quickly shown our worth in creating a coalition, even though we were still a relatively new organization, and definitely new as far as the activism itself. So we had
Well,
another rocket ship ride.
another rocket ship ride. I mean, after a year taking just a year of experience at NAACP, make the number one chapter, and they're holding you back, and you create your own organization, and you get success. I mean, you're doing a lot in the community to advance the growth and advocacy of African Americans, and throughout not only just in the country, but in the county, in the area, but that can be replicated across the country. All right, let's shift this focus to education.
Mhm.
Let's talk about what are some of the issues in education that are impacting the Black community. Like, I'm thinking particularly the achievement gap.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So the even though the activated people, we started off focusing a lot more on police reform and criminal justice reform in general. My the strength of my background really is criminal justice reform. I majored in college, my undergraduate career, I mean undergraduate studies, and I was the NAACP state and local and the criminal justice committee chair. So my strength really was always criminal justice reform. However, I do have a passion for working on education, and so we are going to be focusing more on education going forward. So, to your point, the achievement gap is where we have to start, right? The achievement. This is something that a lot of people talk about. That, sometimes it's spun as an opportunity gap, not an achievement gap, but regardless of which way you spin it, there are significant shortfalls in how our African American students are being educated in America, and that's always been the case. And it's really imperative that we pay closer attention to what are the solutions to fixing that problem, and not just pay lip service. I do believe that has been paid lip service by a lot of different politicians and organizations for decades, and we would like it for for our school boards to pay particularly close attention to making sure that they actually get results and not just put forth some of the same talking points. We understand that the achievement gap doesn't just start in the school system. Understand it's kind of a holistic thing, right? There have been a lot of studies that show that from before African American students even step foot in a classroom, they're a lot of times they're behind, and that's partly due to a lot of socioeconomic factors that are impacting particularly poorer, lower income African American households. We understand that there's only so much that the school systems can do to impact those things, and some of those issues have to be solved through better community programming, housing, all types of things, jobs, and all types of things, kind of lift up these families in the first place. That said, there are things that the school systems can address that have been neglected, to make sure that there is equity in how the curriculums that are being provided, that there's better pre-K programs and more funding for pre-K. A lot of our school systems have done a woefully terrible job when it comes to making sure that our African American kids and lower income families are being able to are put into position to succeed from the very beginning. So those are some of the areas that we want to focus on.
Okay, I see here with your priorities. So we talk about some of the areas. We talk about the achievement gaps. What are some of the root
So I should,
causes?
if I could
Yeah,
interrupt for 1 second. So
yeah, sure.
you've actually caught us like in a good place, because we had taken a pause for the last year. As you mentioned, I started a food truck, and there was we had taken a little bit of a pause. So some of the priorities that are listed on the website right now may change going forward, but these are just kind of penciled in just based on some really initial discussions among the board. But but go ahead.
Okay. So let's talk about like let's do a deep dive. I mean, let's not just we
Sure.
have this is a forum where we can go into depth and go, what are some of the root causes of some of these issues that have led to the achievement gap? What are the challenges? What are some of the reoccurring root problems? We've seen this recur for the last 40, 50 years within the community.
Yeah, well, I think for starters, like I mentioned, it starts in the home for starters, right? Like a lot of families are not uh, don't have the same resources, right? There's a clear parallel drawn between economic resources the family has and how well the students perform, right?
Mm-hmm.
At all grade levels. So that's the starting point. Like, what can we do to help to uplift all families out of poverty, and to make sure that the families are better able to support that child's education, right? And that would take, how do we do that? That's a big problem.
Well, it's a big issue, but are there policies in place that perpetuate that? I'll ask you that question, or are there other societal factors that are barriers to uplifting families from poverty within our country, within our community?
Ooh, how to uplift families from poverty. How long is this show?
We can take as long as you. I mean, this could be like Joe Rogan, 4 hours. I mean, you got.
Yeah.
I mean, you're the star. So
That's a really big question. It goes a really long, we can go as far back in our nation's history, and you will always see the African Americans have had it rough, right, economically,
mhm,
and for a lot of reasons which we're all well aware, right? It starts off with the fact that we were enslaved,
mhm,
and all of the systemic issues that led to systemic discrimination that led families, African American families, to remain in poverty. Redlining, you name it, right? So the we could draw a direct line from the very beginning of of our nation to now, and we'll see that there are just so many systemic problems and policies that were put into place to intentionally uh, suppress and discriminate against African American families. Um, it has to do with policing, it has to do with housing issues, it has to do with economic lack of jobs. So how to fix all of those problems is a very multi-layered problems
so so
that feed
d-
into why African American families have historically and continue to be lag behind.
well, no, well. We're all aware of the ugly history
Right.
in our past. So let's just talk about post civil rights era, post Brown v. Board education. Let's talk about 1970s to present. What do you when you have what is the difference? What is holding the African American community back when you can have other immigrant families that are able to migrate without much in their pocket and they're able to achieve success? What are we doing differently than what they're doing?
Well, so I'm glad you asked that question, because I'm someone that actually kind of straddles both worlds, right? I'm an
Mm-hmm.
immigrant. So I was born in Guyana. I moved to my mom brought me to the States when I was 12 years old. So I'm an immigrant, but I've also lived here most of my life. I grew up here. This is home, and so I'm able to see things from both perspectives. Um, Here's where I think it's something that kind of gets overlooked, that I don't think that a lot of people really appreciate the differences between the immigrant community and the African American community. And I know a lot of times there are some statistical data points that show that immigrant families tend to do a little bit better than overall than African American families. But here's where I think that a lot of people kind of miss. So I believe that the immigrant community is different in a lot of ways. First of all, um, to even get to this point, there's a different mindset. To even get to the type of person that leaves their country, leaves everything that they have with nothing in their pockets, or a lot of times, like my mother came here with $0, right? Like the type of person that gives up everything to move to another country with no connections, no resources, no nothing. That's a very unique individual. That is not, that person doesn't represent the majority of any racial group, right? That class of people that are willing to do that are coming to America with a purpose, right? They have a mission. They have a mission. They have no fallback. They have probably no support from the government to get. There's nothing, right? And so they're driven differently than your average American, whether it be Black American, White American, or anything. There's a different drive, as someone who does that. So I think that's something that it's hard to quantify. I'm sure some scientists can probably put together some studies to figure out how do you factor that in. But I do believe that that's different. The other thing that a lot of people don't think about is a lot of the immigrants that do come here, the ones that are able to get visas and fly over here. Um, a lot of times they actually are better resourced than poor Americans, right? They have connections, they have degrees, they have ways to get jobs. So they're also driven, right? So it's not to say that they all are, but a lot of the people actually are well resources. They at least where they came from, so even if they come here and they end up taking a menial job where in their country they had resources, right? So they had an
Mhm.
education, they're coming to America with something in addition to having a drive. So I do believe that it's a little bit of an unfair comparison when to just say, oh well, African Americans here, or immigrants here, or and to look at it like that, because I think there are some nuances to that discussion that sometimes get overlooked.
Is it a nuance, or are you really identifying grit and hard work? I think I
Well,
think you're
well,
kind of like
well
agreeing with the hard work aspect. I mean, you're saying on one hand, if you've come in here with nothing, I mean, if you come to America, you can make something yourself. You yourself are a success story. I mean, you came here, you're an immigrant. Within 1 year, bam, you made the number one NAACP chapter in the country. Then you left, and you already had immediate success starting your own organization. I mean, that shows right there. And then you're mentioning before, like if it's other countries, there might be better resource, and they're coming in, they're adding value to the country as well. So I guess the question is, are there policies in place that are creating dependencies within the African American community that are preventing them from getting ahead?
um I think that's a good question, but I don't necessarily think so. I do,
Okay.
because I mean we're also ignoring the tens of millions of African Americans who are pulling themselves up from poverty every day, right? Like so, it making a blanket statement like that. I think that's yeah. I wouldn't
Oversimplified.
go so
Okay.
far. Yeah, it's
All right.
oversimplifying
Oversimplified.
the
Okay. All right. I don't think we really touched on the root cause. Like, what are some of the issues? I mean, we talk about the immigrant community. We know that they're coming in here with the architecture we have in this country. They have the ability for success. So, for the African Americans in this country, what are some of the barriers holding them back? What are the root causes of those barriers?
um So I mean, I believe I mentioned that. I mean, I believe I spoke about that already. As far
You
as
mentioned
like some of
economic
the
resources and everything, but
right, right.
I I guess I'm trying to say, like, if you have an immigrant that's coming in, even an African immigrant, an African American coming in resources, and you're showing the African immigrant coming in and working hard and driving it, is it a cultural issue where they're not having that drive, that
Mm.
grit to move forward, to dig themselves up, or are there other factors that are influencing them, or they're just not getting enough support from either government or private? I'll help lead that in the discussion if that helps.
Um, I would tend to believe that it's you have to you can't separate the historical wrongs and the systemic ways that the African Americans have been intentionally marginalized in America, and I do believe it's hard to put how a percentage on it, but I do believe that that's the primary factor. I mean, redlining and okay, so we say that redlining is doesn't exist anymore. But if you look at some of the school districts right now, just going back to the topic of education momentarily,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
you could make a point that redlining still exists today, right? Like the way
absolutely.
that, so these policies, even if they're written out of our codes officially, the impact is very long standing. So I do believe that these are some of the systemic things that still happen. They're just sticking to the topic of education for a minute. There are studies that show that African American students are 2.5 times less likely to be put into advanced academic programs or high achievement programs than their white counterparts, even if they show just as much capacity to learn, right? And so some of that is rooted in our culture of looking at African Americans differently, looking at African American students differently. African American homes. There was a Washington Post article that just came out just a week or two ago that showed that even that white homes, the property values significantly went up during the pandemic. Black homes did not. And so how do you account for that discrimination? There's no law that governs that, right? But it's
I'm
happening.
glad you
You
mentioned
know.
that.
All right.
I'm glad you mentioned it. Let's go there.
Sure.
So, what's
All
the
right.
all right? So, would you agree? What is the most valuable asset that a person owns
They're home.
typically? Their home.
Right.
What are the factors that influence the value of that home?
Uh, I think the school system is number one.
Yep, it
Yep.
sure does. It
Yep.
sure does. And I think when we talk about, I know you're passionate about SROs, but I think the other one we talk about, I think we would both agree, would be crime rate, would it not? And are the two interrelated?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, because you don't have a great education, you might lead to crime. So let's talk about redlining. So, do we have a sort of redlining that exists in America today with a lack of school choice?
Um, I don't know that I would lump school choice in with the redlining issue. I think uh, that's more about having just the way the districts are carved out, and basically trying to segregate all of the poorer families and the black or brown families into one area, and rather than school choice. I'm not okay. Maybe you can help me understand, rephrase the question in a way that helps me understand where you're going with that.
Fairfax County. So, I'll bring a really good example: Mount Vernon
Okay.
and West Springfield,
Okay.
two high schools that are very near to one another, but tend to be
Mm,
worlds apart, and
yeah.
they have very different racial demographics.
Mm,
And well, let's just call this out. All right, with Fairfax County School Board, we will spend $70 million to expand West Springfield rather than redistrict the school to send kids to Mount Vernon, which is mostly black and brown, that was under capacity. Instead of sending an overcapacity school kids to send them to an undercapacity school, and they're very near one another, they just decided, nope, we're not going to do that. Is lack of school choice a form of redlining in that context?
well, so I think you have what could be, and I don't know that what went into the decision to carve out the districts enough to really comment specifically on how that decision was made. But I think,
Mm-hmm.
phrased the way you put it, that could be a situation of redlining. Now, I do believe in having school choice, but I wouldn't necessarily link that to the issue of how the public school districts are drawn up.
Okay. Um, All right. Well, let's move on. I know you do a lot of work on SROs. What is the issues with
Mm.
SROs in schools, and what are some solutions?
Yeah, yeah. So back in, I believe it was 2018, we started a campaign to try to limit what SROs do in schools, right? So the way this all got started was, it was brought to the SRO captain at the time. He came to us and said, "Hey, look, we're looking to try to expand the SRO program into elementary schools." And basically seemed like he wanted to get our blessing on it. When I say we, I mean NAACP. And
That seems
at the
extreme.
time,
Elementary school, grades
yeah, yeah,
K through 5.
Yes, yes. So
Wow.
that
Wow.
was the
Okay.
goal at that time, right? So because
Hmm.
it's still only in middle and high school, and it still is that way. And but there was someone at some level was looking at trying to expand it down to elementary schools, and we thought that that was weird, right? So we started doing some digging to see, well, before I give you an answer, yay or nay, as to whether or not we would support this, we want to get a better idea of what the SROs were doing in the schools. So after doing some digging, we found that the majority of what they did, when I say at least on paper, the arrests that they made uh, had very little to do with like public safety issues or school safety issues, right? Which I think is what majority of families assume that that's what they're doing, right? Like stopping weapons from being in the school or stopping drugs or serious crimes. And not only that, but we realized about 30 something percent of the students that were arrested or charged, however, how you put it, were black and brown youth. So no, actually, no. Let's take that back. About 60% of the students that were black and brown. So about 30% each of African American and Latino, right?
Hmm.
Were the ones getting charged, which is obviously very disproportional to the number of or the percentage of the school district that were black and brown. And so we started trying to figure out, well, what's really behind this? And so we started looking at the school resource officer MOU, the memorandum of understanding that is written between the school system and the police system, police department. And there's where we found like some of where we thought that a lot of the problems originated from. So for starters, there was no distinction as to where the officers job started and where the administrative job started, right? So in the very first paragraph, it said officers were administrators, like quote unquote, officers were administrators. And we felt that that was not just wrong, it was just wrong on so many different levels, right? Because first of all, an officer is an officer of the law, right? He's not an administrator. At no point in time should he be confused with an administrator, right? That just kind of skirts the Constitution. With an administrator, you have the right to say, "Hey, look, I don't want to be searched. I don't want to be spoken to." And all of the rights that come along with the constitutional rights that come along with
And
being
that's
a
hard.
citizen,
That's
right?
hard to impart upon a child between the ages of 5 and 11 to
Right.
understand their
But
rights and
if
not be
you
intimidated. Yeah.
actually hardwire it into the system by writing that into the MOU, now you're actually kind of circumvent the Constitution to say that you don't have the right to tell me no. I do have the right to search your bag or your whatever, because I'm an administrator as an officer saying this, right? Because that's how it's
Hmm.
written. And so that was the first thing we wanted to tackle. Make a clear distinction between what an officer is and let it be clear that at no point in time does he stop being an officer, and he's never an administrator, and he shouldn't. And so with that, let's make it clear what the administrator's duties are and what the officer's duties are, what their mission is, and make it clear that their mission should really only be focused on safe public safety issues and really the most egregious public safety issues. All right. So let's not
Like
have
an active shooter. If we're talking about elementary school, I mean
right,
that's.
right. And I
I think
think
a
that's a
reasonable
lot of
person would
what
be like, yeah. I think that's the only a reasonable person would say the only reason you would have an SRO in elementary school would be to protect against that type of scenario. I mean,
exactly,
it's the
exactly.
extreme scenario.
Right.
Let,
However, but I
okay.
think if I just could wrap up this thought, I think the problem was, and the evidence showed that there really wasn't a glaring need for an SRO in the school because the overwhelming majority of what they were doing were administrative type of functions. Right. We had one principal told me directly that sometimes she asked the SRO to escort students to the office. Right. There's no reason for us to be paying an officer to do that, right? You have administrators who can do that, right? You have paid security in most schools who are hired by the staff, by the administrative staff to handle these things. And so there was just, I think, because there was a lack of a glaring need, the officer started bleeding into other areas that he or she had no business in.
That's an interesting question. Interesting point you made that the schools have their own security that they hire. So, in
Hmm.
that point, are they even needed at the middle school level that they have their own security?
I would argue no. I would argue no. I do
Mm.
believe that we don't need SROs in the school all day long. You know, if you want to have some kind of a roaming function where they're just kind of roaming between schools, just to kind of check in with the principals and find out if there's anything major going on, or have them stationed outside the school, and if something does, you know, happen of significance that where police need to be called, they can come into the school. But no, I think there we've gotten along. First of all, the idea that SROs need to be in schools is a relatively new idea. Like we've gone quite a very for a long time in our history without having SROs in the schools, and so I don't believe that they're a necessity at this and so I think we can do just
Well,
fine with the regular security.
well, I think that's something that gets left out because I think a lot of people think when you're getting rid of the SROs, you're getting rid of security in the schools, and I think you're highlighting to the audience that that is not the case. These schools have their own security that's there. They're just not law enforcement, and the impact that's having
Hmm.
on the community, and that's contributing to the prison the school to prison pipeline. Can
Correct,
we highlight on
correct,
that? Can we? Yeah, let's
mhm.
talk about that. Like the school to prison pipeline, and diversity within the teacher workforce. Where do SROs? Who's constantly reporting, calling them in? How do they get reported?
So I think
I'm
that's
sorry.
an
Who's
excellent
reporting the
point.
incidents? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think what you're getting at is, um, I don't have numbers in front of me right now, but I think your point is an excellent point, which is that we also need to pay attention to how the SROs get involved in these incidents. And a lot of times there are teachers and administrative staff that have kind of been conditioned to call on the police. And so I do think that that's something that needs to be addressed. So, you know, it's not just the SRO. Of course, the SRO gets all the blame because he's the one that ultimately has to write up the report and make the referral to the justice system. And that's, you know, he's kind of like the bridge between the school and the justice system. But I do believe that the beginning of that sometimes it is a flawed way of thinking in how our teachers go about this. And so I will also mention that when we led our effort to restrict how SROs operate in the school, we did have teachers unions on our side. We actually had both of the teachers union in favor of the changes that we made, because once a lot of them were educated as to like what the impact that the SRO was having, when you kind of step back and look at the data. And realize it's not just about these officers, being mean or being racist or whatever on an individual level. When you actually look at the system wide impact, I think a lot of them were shocked at what the data showed, and I think a lot of them also needed to be educated on like how to when and why when is appropriate to bring SROs into the picture.
So I think we agree that the teacher workforce are the ones predominantly reporting incidents to the to for the SROs to investigate. Would that be a correct statement?
I'm not really. I don't really
Or
have the data
staff?
to prove that.
Okay. Okay. All
I
right.
would imagine that they play a significant role because they're the first point of contact, and when a
Okay.
student is acting up or something like that. But I also don't know that for sure because I don't really have data to prove that.
Okay. All right. Well, I was just looking at the Fairfax County report for last year. Majority about 60 to 70% of the reports are generated by administrative staff.
Okay.
Of those reports in totality, about 40% don't result in an arrest or an incident.
Mhm.
60% do, but it shows you that there's a big difference there. Um, huh. I'm just curious of the result of that. Does our teacher workforce represent the demographic of the population it serves?
No, I would say that there's a big no to that. And this isn't just a
Okay.
Fairfax County issue, right? Like this is a nationwide
Mm-hmm.
issue. African American teachers do get discriminated against, and we all understand that there have been plenty of studies to show, I should say, that having more Black teachers in the classroom does make an impact on student outcomes. right? When we talk about the achievement gap, if a student can look up and see a teacher that relates to them and that looks like them, it makes a difference, right?
Hmm.
However, we need to make sure that our administrators appreciate that and our principals appreciate that, because there have been scientific studies done right here in Fairfax County just a few years ago that show that African American teachers were 2.5 times less likely to be hired, even when they were more qualified than their white counterparts. And a lot of times it gets thrown out as, well, this is a pipeline issue. We need to do a better job recruiting, but that's not the case. There actually
Hmm.
is discrimination. The studies show this. This is just me saying this. This is a George Mason study that took the Fairfax County data and peeled it apart and showed that there was some systemic discrimination happening. And so there was an effort. We did lead an effort to try to change how that recruiting process was done. But the one where it fell short was that there was no accountability on the principals. So the principals chose not to adhere to the policies were that the new guidelines. There was no accountability. And I believe that's probably still is the case. So
Hmm.
yeah, we do need to make sure that there is more accountability there.
What are some barriers to accountability?
Ooh.
I'm going through the 5 Ws. We're going to go to the root cause of this issue. We have a lack of diversity in our teacher workforce. It's impacting the identification of, does it result in the identification not only of gifted children, but a lack of quality education in the classroom? There are multiple studies that are out there that show that diversity in the classroom does show an increased improvement in education amongst all races within that classroom.
Mhm.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about, we have a lack of diversity within our teacher workforce. What's called, we talked about the principals. How are these principals able to get away with this? What's having such an impact?
You know what? So I believe it starts with I believe it starts with the school board and the superintendent. I think they have shown a reluctance to stand up and make sure that there are accountability measures in place to make sure that the principals are following these guidelines and these principles. Um, I don't know if this is still the case, but I was actually happened to be to sit in on the hiring panel as one of the citizen representatives for my son's high school when they were looking to hire a new principal, and none of the questions had anything to do with diversity. And and I made us think about it then, but that just kind of goes to show that, yeah, like, why are we hiring a principal and not actually making sure that this person upholds values the importance of diversity, and so we don't know if they actually were going to actually implement any policies that take that pays attention to these issues. So I believe that we need to make sure that our administrative staff and the superintendent, that new superintendent that does come in, does make diversity in hiring a priority, and accountability hiring a priority as well. And
Okay,
if
so
some
let's
of
take
that
one
and
more.
if some of that responsibility needs to be taken away from the principals, or have the school, the administrative staff at the headquarters be some kind of a check and balance to make sure that's happening, then so be it.
Okay, let's take one more step. We talked about a problem with the lack of quality of education being the children, lack of identification gives it programs being due to a lack of diversity, the school to prison pipeline also being due to a lack of diversity. We've seen that some of the root causes could be the principal having an undue influence, and we've delved into another reasons, like there's a reluctance from the school board and superintendents to tackle this problem. Why are they reluctant to tackle that problem?
You know, you're gonna have to ask them that. I really don't.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
Come
that.
on.
I mean, look, I'm not sure.
Oh,
I'm not sure what the problem is.
okay.
They it's just been like this for so long.
I know. Why is
I'm
that?
very disappointed in the fact that they have not been more aggressive at fixing this issue.
What's preventing them from
But
doing that? Come on. You don't want to say, okay.
no, I mean, I'm not saying anything. I really don't know. I really don't know. I'm really baffled as to why they have not tackled this issue more aggressively. to ensure that there's some more accountability in the hiring processes. But yeah, I'll have to. All I can do is approach the problem. Why they aren't doing it? That's something for them to answer.
Okay, all right. I was just addressing who their stakeholders are, like who puts them in power. I guess I was asking that question, but it's okay. All right. So that's where I was going
I,
with that one.
for the record, I'm not beholden to any political party.
No, no, it's not a political party. Nothing a
So,
political party.
but
We're talking about
but
entities. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah. Well,
who
I hear.
votes?
Well,
Who
it eventually gets back to politics. I'm
it
just for the
does. It
record.
does.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm not a. I'm not a
You're not
beholden
a political
to.
animal. I got it.
And
All
yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah, but it comes down to, are you willing to vote? And to have an influence as far as a parent's concerned. Are you willing to go to school
yeah,
board meetings? Are you willing to speak up? Are you actually going to know who your school board members are? Are you going to vote and actually speak up and be a vocal parent? And you have
absolutely.
yeah, and you have a lot of different entities. I mean, you've got teachers unions, and you have interested parents, and everyone has their own agendas. So that is a big influence. We're talking about your school board members.
Absolutely.
Um, okay, so what are we talked about some areas like with policies? What are some policies that you'd like to see implemented? We talked about the SROs. I agree with you that the SROs in the K through the elementary schools, that just who was proposing that, with schools with where they have their own private security. I mean, if they have private, especially in Fairfax, got over a $3 billion budget, you could probably hire a top tier security firm. You're probably right. You wouldn't need to call an SRO unless it needs to lead to court. um, what are some other areas that require improvement, like to address the achievement gap? I mean, we have the COVID learning loss. How would you tackle that? What are some solutions to that problem?
Well, I think we have to be willing to invest more in black and brown students' achievement, and understand that there are some shortcomings in the household. A lot of the richer, wider communities, they do have more resources, and they have the ability to you have, so first of all, you have a lot of stay-at-home parents, because they're one parent makes enough money, and so you have parents where that are more able to kind of stay at home and make sure the kids are doing the homework. You have a lot of poorer families where you may have a single parent, or both parents might be working long shifts, and so the kid comes home and is not getting the same type of reinforcement or help to get homework done and things like that. And so trying to figure out ways to fill those gaps, right? So whether it's more after school programs, more robust after school programs, ways to kind of supplement the education at home. I do believe that that's a good starting point, and I do believe that school systems can play a role in making sure that those things are funded more robustly in communities that have the greatest need for those for those types of programs. Um,
So when you talk, okay,
mm. and I'll
so
say
no,
one
yeah,
so one
okay,
other quick thing. I would say that the there was a law that House Bill 127 that it was just passed, that says that you have to make sure that the curriculum that is provided to middle schools. I think it just addresses the middle schools. Um,
mhm.
they're on par. There's some equity in that, and I do believe that is an issue when you get to like the high school and middle school levels. That some of the richer, wealthier, wider schools have stronger, more robust curriculums than some of the poorer black schools, and that's across the country, right? So that's not just here in Fairfax or even in Virginia. We do need to make sure that we're offering all of our students the same curriculum, not just like not just on paper, right? When I say on paper,
Mhm.
like yes, the district wide, all the curriculum is available to everyone, but you have to be bused from your school to the other school in order to get that. Right. That's very disruptive. And I think we need to find ways to make sure that all schools offer the same curriculum. And whether we want to fill some of those gaps virtually or not, that's something that should be looked at. But I believe that there are things that the school systems need to be more aggressive at doing.
So, Kofi, just for our audience's perspective, House Bill
Mm.
127 was passed. The impetus behind that was in protest to changes to Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology, nation's number one high school for the last 2 years, according to US Newsweek. And what was found, and just for full disclosure, I mean, I'm a TJ parent. Thomas Jefferson's also known as TJ. Um, Going through this, serving on the diversity committee for TJ, the TJ Diversity Committee, I've come across information that what Kofi has said is correct. That not all the middle schools offer the same in-depth instruction, in-depth rigor and curriculum throughout the county. However, most of they have what in Fairfax County are known as centers, where within Fairfax there are 24, and not all of them are as easily accessible, particularly in the poor communities, for whatever reason. And House Bill 127 was written to address that, to require Fairfax County to provide that opportunity of the in-depth curriculum. So I guess the question now is that now they're required to do it, how do we make sure that they do it? I mean, how are
Mhm.
some solutions? Do we increase federal funding to the government for after-school programming? Do we bring in private vendors? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'll be the first to say that I was highly disappointed to see that so many Democrats voted against it, because I do believe that this is one of those things that really gets at the heart of the inequity with our the racial inequity with our schools, and I hope that this can serve as a starting point to fixing some of those inequities. So I personally reached out to a few of the folks who voted against it to voice my displeasure that they voted against this bill. Um, Now, how do we get it implemented? Because as you may be well aware, there are a lot of bills that get passed that just get ignored, right? Sometimes the state does stuff, and the localities are like, we'll get to that when we get to that. So,
Not here, not in
yeah.
Fairfax. Okay.
But yeah, I do believe that we need to mount a serious a campaign to educate people, that the community, that this is now a law, and this is something that needs to be implemented. I had one legislator tell me that, yeah, that one of the reasons that she voted against it was because there was an accountability attached to the measure, to the vote. And my response to her was that I'll be the accountability measure, right? So, like, I personally do plan on making sure that this is something that is known publicly, and that our school board does take some steps to making sure that it is implemented. So, public education is one, and organizing is the other. So, just making sure that we reach out to our school board members, and making sure that it gets done.
This really is a bipartisan issue. Would you agree?
It should be. It should be, and
Yeah.
that's why I said I've yet to hear what the like a functional a reason for why anyone opposed it in the first place, other than politics. I think it's a shame that politics has been trumping. Or basically, what I feel like a lot of Democrats are willing to sacrifice African American kids for the sake of politics, and I felt like that was the case in this situation, where they just didn't want a Republican to get a win. And that's actually told to me. Like, that was actually a senator told me that. Like, I hate to even have to repeat that. It was so disgusting, but didn't want the Republicans to get a win. And I get it. Politics is politics. That's just how the game is played sometimes. But in the process, what you're doing there is sacrificing our kids' progress and well being, so that for a political win. And it should be a bipartisan issue. This is an opportunity, and so I'm hoping to take advantage of that. Excuse me. Sorry.
Well, thank you, Kofi. Well, I think you both. I think you would agree with me that we're both pro-black, not pro-party. So,
Absolutely. That's
you know,
that's that's
a party has to earn our vote. It must absolutely earn our vote.
absolutely.
So, so, it's great. Let's think about like some of these metrics that we can use. Are there any metrics that we can use to measure their progress and make sure they're implementing this bill properly, making sure that our students are getting a quality education?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have to give it some more thought. Honestly, I haven't really. sat down, and but I'm willing to strategize with anyone who's willing to work on making sure that this gets implemented properly. So I don't have an answer right now, but talk to me in a few weeks and maybe I will.
Okay, great. Um, so okay, so we're about to wrap up here. Any final thoughts? Any message you'd like to give to our audience?
That you know what I appreciate. I'm a Democrat. Um, I've voted majority Democrat. I know that you're a Republican, but I believe that, hey, like you said, you have, for me at least, I'm pro-black before anything else. I'm always willing to put politics aside. That's always been my mo. I From the time I stepped in, one of the first things I did when I was the Fairfax County NAACP president was I created a report card that gave a lot of the Democrats failing or average grades when it comes to criminal justice reform. I believe that, hey, you have to earn my vote. You have to earn my respect. You have to fight for my issues, and I hope that other folks who believe in the things that I'm fighting for here understand that, and are willing to take that approach as well, because we have to hold our elected officials accountable, regardless of what party they are. And if there's an opportunities to work across the aisle to get some solutions, to get some things done, and actually see some results of our efforts, then I'm here for it.
Kofi, tell us, how can people reach out to you? How can they contact you? How can they find out more about yourself and the Activated People?
Sure. So our the activated people is the website is theactivatedpeople.com. And we had taken a little bit of a hiatus over the last year, but we are looking to jump back into things coming over the summer into the fall, and we're particularly interested in activism around education. And so, if you're interested in getting involved, just the form is on the website. Just shoot us an email through the website. And if you're interested in purchasing the book, as you can see, I have a lot of opinions, a very opinionated person. The book is called Bull in the China Shop: The Evolution of a Racial Justice Activist. It is available on Amazon, and actually just won an award for a category of government and corruption issues by the Book Fest. So yeah, it's causing a lot of waves. It really just kind of tells my story and how some of the craziness that I dealt with here in Fairfax County, and how I became to become a leader in the racial justice field. So hope you can pick it up. And if you're looking to cater a dinner or some kind of corporate event or private event or anything like that, we also have my food truck here, which is Soul Rebel. We do Caribbean American fusion. We could be reached at soulrebelfood.com, and also has our contact information on how to get in touch with us there. And so our Instagram, all that is at Soul Rebel Food. We sell sauces. We do a lot of things. So we have a food truck. We do catering. You name it. I wear quite a few different hats here, as you can tell. So I appreciate the opportunity again to have this discussion, and congratulations on all the great work you've been doing, Dr. Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Kofi Annan. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. We had a great discussion with Mr. Kofi Annan, founder of the Activated People and former president of the NAACP and author of Bull in the China Shop. Please check out our content on usanow.tv and other episodes of Education Matters. If you'd like to be a guest on our show, please feel free to contact us, and we'll arrange an episode where you can join us and talk about education across not only within our community, but in any issue, national issue across the country. Thank you.